Hello, hello, and welcome. Jasmine is here this week with us and saying hello. So, for those of you joining live, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. For those of you on the recording, um, as you're watching it on the recording, you can scroll forward if you would like. I would recommend watching it all the way through the videos generally, because we go through lots of different types of tips and tricks and things like that throughout the class. But I can understand if there's just specific things that you're looking to learn and you want to just kind of skip forward and watch quickly. So we'll get started straight away. So today we're doing an easy bonbon design, and this only requires one color and white, basically. So when I say color, we're talking about colored cocoa butters. So this is a white colored cocoa butter. It's just to show you the kind of bottle that it comes in. So this is the way that the colored cocoa butters will come when you buy them in a container like this. And then it's a case of how do you get it out of the container. So there's several ways that you can do this, and I've gone through different iterations over the years. So one is, and it's a little bit temperamental doing it this way, is putting the whole bottle in hot water and then letting the color melt and then getting it out of the bottle that way. The downside of doing that is that when you're using warm water generally with chocolate, you're going to risk getting water in the chocolate. So that's not a way that I would do it. It is a way that you could do it. You might also note that when these arrive on the packaging, it says that they're pre-tempered. But when you go to get the color out of the container, you're going to take it inevitably out of temper. So you always want to temper your colors before you use them. The way that I would do it in the past is put it in I have a food dehydrator, so I put it in there, turn it on high, because the bottle's full. It's going to take a while for that to melt, so you'll kind of get the edges will start melting, and you can get some out of the bottle to use straight away, or you can put it in a dehydrator for a couple of hours on a low temperature, and then keep it in there while you work, so it keeps them melted as well, and at the temperature that you need in order to start tempering them and using them. Now, I don't use my dehydrator a whole lot during the summer months. It's a little bit too warm and it puts too much warmth into the atmosphere. So instead of doing that, what I've taken to recently, and I haven't used this bottle yet, this is new, is I'll cut the top off. I'll cut the whole thing down the middle with a sharp knife, and then I'll remove all the colored butter, put it into a different kind of container, and then chop off what I need and melt it down. And then generally I use a yogurt maker to melt my colors, because it doesn't put a whole lot of heat into the room, and you can have it melting for a couple of hours. It keeps things in temper as well. So I quite like doing it that way. And these little pots come with the yogurt maker. So after I melt the color down from the container, I'll pour it into this little glass pot, and then this holds quite a bit, and you can use this to do your coloring. So today we're going to be working with white and gold. This class is sort of just like a little intro to coloring and addressing questions that tend to come up in reels that I'll post on coloring. So it's not an in-depth deep dive, but I do have a live stream class that addresses the kind of more intricate matters of working with colors. So tools, we've got little mini spatulas that are really helpful for when you're working with small amounts of color. Little stainless steel bowls. I prefer stainless steel because it doesn't retain heat. It retains cool, so the colors temper a little bit faster. Got a heat gun here that has a variable temperature control dial on the back. So this goes down to 50 degrees and up to 600 degrees. And then for and then the mold that we're going to be using today, and this is just, I don't use this mold a whole lot, but mostly it's for when I do demos and reels and stuff. It's such a large cavity that you can really see clearly what's going on. So that's why we're using this one. But you can apply the design we're going to do today to any circular mold anyway. But the principles of what we're doing can be applied to any kind of mold that you want to work with. So this is a 40 millimeter half sphere mold. I have another one that's a 30 millimeter. It's a lot smaller, but again, for demo purposes, this is a really good one. This is a Martellado mold, and the code is MA5004 if you should want to purchase this. I get my molds from Home Chocolate Factory and sometimes from Keylink over here in the UK. So first I'm looking at the temperature of the mold, and it's going to be close to your room temperature. So this is 21 degrees, 21.8. And for me, that's a little bit warm. If you use your mold at that kind of temperature, generally speaking, your colors are going to puddle in the bottom because the mold is too warm really for the colors to set almost straight away when they touch the mold. They should really just stay in place. So I'll cool this before we start working with it, but I don't want to put it in the fridge just yet because we don't want to put our molds in the fridge for too long, unless you have a wine fridge and you can store your molds in there at sort of 16 degrees. If you're using a normal kind of home fridge to chill your molds, you really only want to do about 30 to 60 seconds at a time, because otherwise they get too cold, and when they come out and they hit the room temperature, particularly if the room temperature is 20 degrees, if they were to go down to 13 in the refrigerator, when it hits the room temperature, you're going to get condensation on the mold, and then that's going to be a problem for like blemishes and just general moisture that's going to get involved with the chocolate at that point. So we're only going to do about 30 to 60 second bursts just to bring the temperature down on the mold, and then we'll start working with it. During the summer, you can use an air conditioner in your space, and you can chill the mold in front of the air conditioner as well. You don't have to use the fridge. These are a selection of different brushes. So one is Wilton brand, which is a kind of cake company over here, and they do like piping bags and tips and stuff. And they have this set that just has a really small round brush, and I like using this one for different purposes, but I've taken a couple out. So this is a makeup brush. I was at a friend's house once and I saw a pot of makeup brushes. I thought, man, that'd be great for coloring molds, because they're small and they're really soft as well. So I just bought a set, and they are quite good. So we're going to use those two today. They're the round tip brushes, and we're just going to be doing a swirl on the mold and then a background color. So often a question that will come up is, what's the second color? So what's the thing you put in the back? And that is what I refer to as a background color. And you can either do that or you can shell with white chocolate. But if you just do, let's say, gold and then a dark chocolate shell, the gold is not going to really stand out so much. So you do want to have something that goes behind the gold that makes it stand out. So that could be white, or it can be, in the case of what we're doing today, a mixture of white with whatever color you're using. It just keeps it nice and simple. So if you're new to coloring, using just white and one color keeps things nice and simple, because it can be quite overwhelming when you first start. You want to use all your colors, and then you get overwhelmed and nothing really works out, and it's all a little bit too much. So it's good to just try and keep things as simple as possible. Now, for melting the colors today, I have the colors here in a pot, the glass pot that I showed you a moment ago. I'm going to put the mold to the side for the moment. And they're set in the pot. I didn't melt them down first, because the way that I do this these days, when I'm just doing small amounts, even if I'm just doing like 2 or 3 Bonbon molds that I need to do, I melt it and I'm putting it on top of the scale, not to weigh it, but just to keep the pan off of my work surface so the work surface doesn't get warm. I just take out what I need, which isn't going to be a whole lot. Use a knife. This is my chocolate knife. Put it in a warm pan, and that's going to melt down pretty quickly just because it's just cocoa butter. And you don't need a whole lot, but it's good to work with a little bit more than what you actually need. And the temperature of the pan is 52 degrees. So probably we're going to need to give that a little bit more heat for that to melt down. So all we're looking to do is melt this to at least over sort of 36 degrees. If you're going to temper it by hand, meaning the full tempering process and not using cocoa butter soak, then you'll want to bring the temperature up to at least sort of 45 degrees for colored cocoa butter to start and initiate the tempering process. And all I did was just warm this pan on the stove before we started. And that might be enough to get us to where we need to be. And the color is currently 47 degrees, which is good. Not entirely melted, however. And this is just an infrared thermometer. You can use any kind that you want. A probe thermometer, I find, is just a bit tricky to work with when you're doing chocolate in general, but with the colors, it's such a small amount of color that that putting a probe into this would be quite tricky. So using an infrared, you just get an immediate read, and it's a lot easier. So this is now 50 degrees. Got my stainless steel bowl here. I'm going to pour my color into the bowl. And these little mini spatulas are really flexible, so it allows you to get pretty much everything out of the pan. And then we're just going to use very small amount of butter in here. There's maybe a little over a tablespoon probably. And we just want to start moving that around this cool bowl. And that's our tempering process. It's such a small amount that this is quite a large bowl to hold that content. So you can use the whole circumference of the bowl. And that's 32 degrees, and we're going to take it down to about 27 or 28. We're going to use our heat gun to bring it back up. If you're working with cocoa butter silk, you can temper this the same way that you would if you were doing chocolate. So if you don't have, if you don't want to use a heat gun or whatever the case may be, if you're a little bit cautious about it being well tempered, you can just also use your cocoa butter silk. Just bear in mind you're only going to need a very, very small amount because silk you only need 1%. And this is like, I don't know, like maybe 10 grams. So you're really only going to need a dash of silk to temper this if that's what you're going to do. Now, it's about 20 degrees in here. It's on the warm side for my liking. So this is going to take a little bit longer than if your room was 18 degrees, this would have dropped down to 27 already. Give it one more check here. So a way to speed the cooling process is to just transfer it to another bowl. And that the coolness of this bowl will drop that temperature at least a few degrees. I can already see that it's thickened. And that's now at 27 degrees. It was at 29. So it just knocks a few degrees off pretty rapidly. So make sure your gun is on 50 degrees. You don't want high heat here or you're going to take it right out of temper. You can use a hair dryer instead of a heat gun if you like. Oop. Dropped my thermometric system. And then let's just see what the temperature is here. And that's at 28. We're going to bring that up to about 30 before we work with it. Okay, so we're going to pop that to the side. And then again, we can take the temperature of our mold. You want to get used to, if you're going to be working with chocolate, taking the temperature of everything pretty frequently. So that was 22, and I'm going to pop that in the fridge for about 30 seconds to a minute. Now what we can do while that's cooling a little bit is just get our white in. Now we're going to just put it directly into the pan because we're going to be mixing it with the gold anyway. If you wanted it to be pure white, you'd want to clean your pan out either with paper towel or like properly clean it and then dry it by putting it on the stove. We'll do a little bit more than that. That should be sufficient, and we'll pop this over to the side on a really low temperature, so just using the lowest temperature that my stovetop goes up to. Okay, and then let's have a look at our mold temperature. So we're going to be using our brushes here in a moment. We're going to need a spatula, and we've got our tempered color here. It's good to work with paper towels. You can use, you know, normal cloth tea towels if you prefer. Excuse me. But this keeps everything nice and tidy and clean as you work, which, especially if you're working in a home kitchen, it's nice to keep things as tidy as possible generally, but specifically if you're in a home kitchen as well. If you have like limited amounts of space. So that's at 20 degrees. We're going to give that another 30 seconds or so. And we're looking for that mold to come to anywhere between sort of 17, 18, 16 to 18 is generally my vibe. If your room temperature is quite low, so let's say your room temperature was 15, 16 degrees, your molds are inevitably going to be that temperature. I wouldn't warm them. You just work with them where they are. Now, during the winter, you need to work a little bit faster because the room temperature is generally cooler depending on your heat setting in the kitchen. I don't really use my heat a whole lot, to be honest, but I've just recently moved into a property that's a lot colder, so I have a feeling I will be using my heat this year more. But I wouldn't have the room generally over sort of 17, 18 degrees anyway. And as you're like waiting for things to happen, we're waiting for the mold to cool, just keep your color warm. And you don't have to rush. You don't have to be like frantic about anything. You just want to kind of keep it warm. And this is what keeps you sane while you work with chocolate, is having the right tools. A heat gun helps you just keep things where they are and you don't need to rush around. So let's have a look at the mold temperature again. That's at 18. So we'll just give that one more go in the fridge for 30 seconds. So what we're going to be doing is just a very simple swirling motion in the back of the mold, because the design that we're doing is this kind of really simple swirl where it's just one color and then the swirl around the kind of perimeter of the rim here. So you can do this however you want. You don't have to do the design that I've done. But if you want to do that, then I'm just going to show you the way that I do it. So if you try to intentionally put a swirl on, you tend to mess it up, I find. So I'll do this a couple ways just to show you what I mean by that. So I've just brought the camera in a bit so it's a little bit closer. So if I try to like intentionally paint around the rim, I can already feel that my hand kind of judders a little bit and it's going to look not great. So we'll do one like that, so you can see what I mean. So we don't want to load the brush up with too much paint because it's going to drip everywhere. So the mold temperature is now 18 degrees. Now, if I try to do this by being really careful, you can't really, it's a bit tricky to see this until the background color is on, but it looks okay, but it's a little bit messy. It's definitely not easy to see at this point. Now, what I found was, you know, when artists draw and before they go to draw the circle, they kind of hover above the paper and then they have pen touch. So that's what I came to. And it gives a much more organic feel. And then you just center around this part of the mold. And if you want, you can even go down a little bit, make a bigger rim if you'd like. And each time I'm just reloading the brush a little bit, tapping out on the side of the bowl to remove excess. If you'd like, you could go from the center rather than from the rim. So we'll just bring this down a little bit, go down a bit further into the mold. And this kind of quick motion where you're not trying to control anything is really the way to go in order to get something that looks very natural. So as much as you might have the idea of what you'd like this to look like, when you're starting out, when you're learning, I mean, I've been doing it for a really long time and still I wouldn't trust myself to be able to draw very well on the mold and super intentionally. It's just not my forte, to be honest. And so you can't see all of them, but you can see the ones that we did that were more central. And frankly, they're all going to look cool. So it doesn't really matter too much. Now, when we're done with the coloring, you put the mold on the side and that gives full air circulation so that it can cool quite quickly. What we'll do is I'm going to pop this in the fridge again just to, because we're going to do the background color here in a second. I'm going to pop that in the fridge just for like, again, those sort of 30 to 60 seconds. And we're going to use what we have, some of this with the white that we're melting down to make what I refer to as the background color. Now, alternatively, you could shell with blonde, with white, maybe even milk, and you'd still see the gold. And this is the white that's been melting down with just that little bit of gold in there. Not a big deal because we're going to be using that anyway. It's almost fully melted. It was just on a very low temperature. Now that goes into a bowl. And we're going to temper this. So for those of you who have kind of experience working with chocolate and you understand different the different variables of tempering and seeding and stuff like that, this color is now seed. So instead of needing to temper the white completely, we're going to add gold, and the gold is going to be our seed because it's already tempered and it's been worked with a bit, which means it's got a decent amount of beta crystals in there. And by mixing these two together, we get a really pretty background color. And you can decide, do you want it to be a bit lighter? Do you want it to be a bit darker? You could mix another color into here, a little bit of pink maybe, would give you a kind of rose gold, a little bit of black, would do something completely different. If you want to mess around and see what does what, it's good to work with really small quantities of chocolate in that case. Just do little test batches, even on the table or just in a really small bowl. And then for our background color, because this is a large 40 millimeter half sphere, I'm going to use a brush that's quite large. I'd normally use something a lot smaller than this, but that's because I tend to work with Bonbon 13-gram cavity ones. But this is good for the kind of half sphere. And let's just check the temp. And that's 30 degrees. And because it was already, because it's been seated, we don't have to do a whole lot of up and down with it, but we probably will inevitably need to just warm that back up before we use it, but we'll see how we go. So let's have a look at the color that we've put on so far and the temperature of the mold. Now this needs to be relatively set before you're going to put your background color on. Otherwise, you're going to do this motion because you're going to be pressing into the mold with the color. The color is going to be roughly 29 to 31 degrees, and you're going to be pressing. So you could, if this doesn't set enough, if this first color isn't set enough first, you could really, just end up mushing it all together a bit, and it won't look very clean. So firstly, the mold temperature is 17. And then I do a little test if I'm going to work too quickly, and that's not set. That's not ready to go yet. So I'm going to put this back in the fridge. And something else that we can start looking at is our chocolate that we're going to be using for shelling. So I'm using dark chocolate. I do tend to work a lot with dark chocolate. And I'm going to put this again on top of the scale just to not warm the surface. And this chocolate's at 33 degrees, and we're going to want it about 37 degrees because we're going to add the silk around 35 degrees to temper this. And if it's too, what was I going to say? Oh, if it's too low of a temperature, when you put it in the bowl, like I just showed you with the colors, you put it into another bowl and it's going to drop a few degrees in temperature. So we want that to be about 37 so that if it does drop a few degrees, it's not going to be like we won't need to then warm it back up again. Okay, any questions at this point from anybody before we carry on with the background color? Do feel free to ask questions as we go along in the chat box. And if you're busy while you're watching this and you're not in a place to ask questions, do feel free to comment afterwards when you have more time to watch it and focus. And I'm happy to help with any questions that come up afterwards as well. While we're here, what we can do, waiting for that to set a little bit, is we can warm our brushes to get the color off. So I use my heat gun, and on a low temperature, I just spread the bristles of the brush out until you can feel it all soften. Use a paper towel and just remove as much color as you can from your brushes, like that. And then those are clean enough. Next time you go to use them, you do the same thing, warm it before you're ready to work. And let's have a look at our color here. This is now 27 degrees, so we'll bring that up a couple degrees. That to the side, and let's have a look at our mold. So have a little another go, and now that feels like it's ready. So we'll bring the camera back in a little bit so this is pretty focused. And then I just want to make sure my brush is nice and soft before I start. If you've used this previously, it can be a bit stiff because there's cocoa butter in there. And then all you do for a background color is dip your brush in. You want to get quite a bit of color, not like before. You do want a decent amount of color on there. And you just swirl it, wanting to do 2 coatings because 1 coating isn't quite enough. You don't want a lot. And if you see ripples and puddles, you just go back, grab that out. When I say grab, you just go back and swirl again, and it'll remove anything that's excessive. Go all the way to the rim. Reload as you need with more. And if you see something that needs to come out, don't wait too long, maybe 10, 15 seconds, go back and grab it out. And that's the background color process. I'm going to scrape the back. And then you can now more see the design because you've got that background color on, which is the same thing that happens when you're shelling as well. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to see, let's see here. Seeing if you can see. So if I hold it maybe like that, I can see where that needs another coating. if you shell and you like when you hold this up to the light, if you can see brush strokes and stuff like that through it, then it means that the dark chocolate or whatever you're going to put in next, you'll be able to see that through it as well. So you want to make sure you have a good coating on there. We're going to warm our brush while that goes into just semi-set. We're not looking for crystallization. We're just looking for it to be set enough that when we go to do our next coating, the brush doesn't pull the paint off. If you do that too soon, the brush will just pull the paint off and kind of counterproductive to what you're trying to achieve. Okay. And let's check the color temperature. That's at 27, so we'll bring that back up again. And I think now we can start getting our dark chocolate tempered. So we've got a large, very large bowl here, much larger than what we're going to need, really, which gives it lots of space. Same with the color, really big bowl in comparison to the amount of color that we're using. Temperature lowers a lot faster. So for this, I am going to weigh it because I'd like a sort of 400 grams or so for this mold. That'll do. And we'll just get that lowering in temperature because once your color is on, give it a few minutes. We're not going to do that today. Normally I do my coloring in stages. So I'll do the coloring, then later the afternoon, I'll let it sit all day. Later in the afternoon, I'll do the shelling. I don't typically do it so like one after the other, coloring and then shelling, unless like I'm in a rush or I need something urgently, but generally that's not the case. And this is 35.6, and that's 400 grams of chocolate, so we're going to need 4 grams of silk. So we get our silk out, tare the scale so that it's at 0 with the silk on. Take your silk off, grate what you need, so we're going to need 4 grams. And once you've done a little bit and you want to see, put it back on the scale. That's 5 grams that we just put in, so that's all we need. It's a little over what we need, actually. And then you're going to get your silk mixed through. And that's not a mixing motion. It's more of like a pressing and mixing at the same time because you want to get that silk mixed in as quickly as possible before the temperature of the chocolate lowers. And then we have this ready way before we need it for the shelling. So it's going to be a situation of keeping an eye on it and just bringing it back up to 32 degrees or so for shelling. So we'll just pop this over here as long as that's not annoying for viewing purposes. And we're done with our silk, so that can go. And then let's see if we can do our second coating now. Same process as before. We just want to check and make sure that, yeah, that's nice and set. That's not going anywhere. Check the temperature of your color before you start. That's 25, so we'll bring that up slightly. Just going to warm the brush because it gets a little bit stiff from having cocoa butter in there. Get that nice and smooth again, so it has a good smooth motion inside the cavity as well. And then you're going to do the exact same thing that you just did. And if you see gaping gaps, that's going to be sort of your focus, is covering those gaps in. If you go to do this and it looks like the color's coming off, you've just started a little bit too soon. So just let it set for a little bit longer. And if you're doing this and you have plenty of time, you don't need to use the fridge necessarily. If your room temperature is, sort of 18 degrees, you can let it sit at room temperature to set, do some other things, come back. Just always monitoring your colors to make sure that they haven't set. And then that's going to do it. Now from here, if we weren't in a live class, I would let this set for maybe at least 20 minutes, but generally longer. Not for any other reason except for that I don't tend to do things one after another. And then I would shell it. But because we're in class, we're going to shell it in a couple of minutes. The first thing we're going to do is get our brush clean before we move on to that. So the gun is still on low. You don't want to do this on high temperature or you're going to singe your brushes. And then when I create colors like this, I use this for a bonbon that I do as well. So I have a little pot here that I put my excess colors that I've made into. If this was just gold or just white, I would put it back into the pot that it came from. And now we can turn the temperature up, because we don't need this to be in temper anymore. And just get all the butter out of the bowl. Store it in your little container here. You can put a cover on this, store it at room temperature. When you want to use it again, you're going to do the same thing. Put it into a pan, melt it down, and use it. Obviously tempering it first. You always temper everything. Even if it's been tempered already, you're going to take it out of temper when you heat it. I always clean the bowls with paper towel before I put it into the sink, to just avoid any kind of clogging your drains with cocoa butter. Get all the excess gold out of the bowl. And this could be any color. It doesn't need to be gold. It could be pink, purple, green, blue, whatever you want. Clean the bowl. Okay, and that's that for our colors. So let's now move on to shelling. When you're shelling with color is different than just shelling a blank mold. So if you have experience doing shelling just plain molds with no color on it, you can do that at kind of whatever temperature you want, anywhere between kind of 27 to 31, 32. I have my preferences. Everybody has their preferences. But when it comes to shelling and you have color on the mold, you need to shell. The shelling chocolate needs to be about 32 degrees. Otherwise, what can happen is the color doesn't soften against the chocolate and the color stays on the mold. And when you go to take the shells out, the color sticks, which is another common issue that people come up against. So right now I'm just warming the chocolate. I know it's going to have dropped since we tempered it, so I'm just going to warm it a little bit, and then we'll check the temperature. And we want it to be about 32 degrees. That's at 31.9, and that's good enough for me. So now for shelling, I'm getting all the chocolate down into a big puddle in the bowl. I'm going to fill each cavity right to the top. And I say this to people in live classes a lot. Chocolate's the kind of thing where sometimes you need to work fast, and sometimes you can go really slowly. Sometimes there's moments where you can go fast, moments where you need to go slowly. This process is a little mix of both. You want to get the chocolate in quickly. We're going to tap to remove air bubbles, because air bubbles equal oxygen entering. And when you have a filling that's oxygen sensitive, like let's say a liquid-based ganache, if there's an air pocket, that filling is going to go off quickly or more quickly because there's oxygen present. And also liquid will find its way out of a bubble. So if you have something like a liquid-based filling in there, it will find its way out of an air pocket because it's always finding its way out. So this is why shelling and capping, they're two really important processes when you're making chocolate, because those processes give you a stable structure to have stuff inside, and that lengthens your shelf life. So if you have no oxygen present inside of the shell, then your shelf life is going to be a lot better just from that point, regardless of the formulation that you're using for your filling. It'll be better. It'll have a better shelf life because of the shell. So at this stage, this part of the process will depend on the size of the cavity. So this is a 40 millimeter. This is bigger. So it's going to take a little bit longer to get the kind of shell thickness that I'm looking for. The room temperature, the mold temperature, the chocolate temperature, all of those things affect how thick or how thin your shell is going to be. Now for me, that's looking good. I can see it's starting to create a shell. So I turn it upside down and we tap. And you're tapping to remove the excess. And once those drip slow, you're just going to, while it's upside down, run your spatula, clean it on the side of the bowl. Avoid doing this. It splatters everywhere. Just clean it off with your spatula, keeping it inverted, especially in a warmer room, because it keeps the chocolate from going back down into the bottom. So you just keep it inverted like this. You get a nice even shell, and then turn it over. and give it a good hard scrape to remove all the excess chocolate that's on the top of the mold. And at this stage, you can clean the sides of your mold if there's stuff on there from the shelling, the surface, if there's anything else to clear off the surface. And at this point, if your chocolate is moving and you're having difficulty keeping the shell, then you probably didn't temper it properly, or your room is really quite warm. So this is a nice shell. This will be a nice thin shell. And I have more in-depth courses on my website for shelling and coloring, making bonbons, fillings, stuff like that, where we go more in depth into these processes and any kind of troubleshooting and stuff as well. So for this, generally I would keep this out at room temperature to let it set slowly. I have a wine fridge. I'll put this in the wine fridge at 16 degrees for the time being. Before that, I'll keep it on my work surface, and I'll keep it on its side like this. If it was warmer in the room, if it was over 21 degrees, I would put it directly into the wine fridge like this, so it gets full air circulation for about 10 minutes. Then you can put it down. Now this is going to take longer than what we have. It's going to take longer to set than the time that we currently have in this class. So I'll just show you again the ones that I made in advance. And all of the excess that's on your surface, as long as you work cleaned your table before you started, cleaned during, you can just scrape all your excess chocolate back into the bowl. Use your heat gun on a high temperature to get that back out of your bowl and into a container or back into the pan, whichever way you're going to work. And then again, just to go over what the design looks like when it comes out. This is the design that you're going to end up with. Oop. Quite thin shells. So just see the size of the shell, like that. And that is it. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that answered some of the more common questions that come up when I post reels and stuff like that. Again, if you want something that's a bit of a deeper dive into understanding how to work with these in different ways as well, different types of designs, I have live stream classes that you can join on my website. And there's a link in the description to take you to a post on my site where you'll find where to find the molds, thermometers, things like that, different links for stuff in the UK. If you're not in the UK, you might just use them as a guide for when you're, whatever country you're in, to find the things that you're looking for. And that is it for today's class. So we've got a couple comments. Alona is with us. You're very welcome. Thank you very much. I'm glad you got your fix for today. And Jasmine, thanks for coming all the way from Australia. Appreciate you. And that's it for today. So if there's no other questions or comments, it was lovely to spend some time with you, and I look forward to seeing you in the future. You're very welcome. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everybody. Bye, guys.